Hello, everyone, and welcome everybody to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. This week we have with us Lorenzo Emilitri, the founder of Loway, an old friend of mine and one of the members of the Italian voice over IP mafia. Welcome, Lorenzo.
Hi, Luca.
Even though he lives in Switzerland, is still part of us, of the
Yes.
Italian group. So, would you like to introduce yourself and your company a bit for people who don't know you?
Yes, I started the Loway almost 20 years ago, based on the fact that at the time I was trying to build a call center based on Asterisk, and Asterisk was very early. The AppQ module was just had been built not so a long time before. And so I didn't want to do. I had this opportunity to build a small contact center, like 4 people or whatever, and there was nothing to do the monitoring. So I didn't want to do it. So I started asking around if anybody had a piece of software or tool to do basic, I don't know, counting how many calls were taken and stuff. And there was nobody, and I realized I had to write it. And after I started writing it, a number of people started contacting me because they had the same issue. So I realized it could be a viable opportunity. And after almost 20 years, I'm still doing more or less the same thing, even if the world has changed quite a bit. And what we do is our main product is a piece of software called Qmetrics that is a tool to do the monitoring and reporting of contact centers. It works at the moment for Asterisk, and it works for FreeSwitch, and for now for a number of other PBXs and virtual PBXs as well. We have a piece of software that does outbound dialing that's called Wombat. The name is funny, but the tool is pretty tough. And we have what we are working mostly at the moment is on the cloud platform, where we basically offer monitoring and call center monitoring for telephony providers at scale, so to a number of smaller customers. So that's more or less what we do. We are based in southern Switzerland, so basically right across the Italian border, and we speak Italian, but we are in a small part of Switzerland that still speaks Italian.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, you're actually pretty close to where I live, about an hour and something away. So
Yes.
the people following the ClueCon Weekly in the last few weeks have noticed I always start with the same things. The world has changed in two ways over the last 10 years. So over the last 10 years, there's been one change, which has been the move to the cloud of telephony in general. And that's something that I'd like to ask you about how that changed for your products and if there's anything in particular that's changed for you. And then the more important change happened about a year and something ago when someone decided bat sandwich or something like that was a good idea at the time. And well, I will not. I mean, I could have told them it was a bad idea, but apparently I wasn't there, so that's what happened. So, did the change from the industry from on-premise to cloud change much in the way you approach your software, how you run things, or have you just built adapters? How was it? Have you noticed a big change there, or is it not too much?
From our point of view, actually, the change is not that big because the idea of having a lot of partitioned systems plays very well with what we do. So it is for us, the change was not especially painful, let's say. Personally, I am a bit. I don't know if I'm so happy about it because 20 years ago, we were kind of pirates. We were fighting to have voice back from the big telcos, and nowadays we are the big telcos. So it's kind of strange. So we started being the rebels, and we ended up being the empire. But whatever. So from our point of view, there is not a big change technically. What we see is that there are a lot of for us, there are a lot of very interesting opportunities in offering the product as a service, because the kind of things you built 10 years ago or 20 years ago were meant for people that had good technical level, let's say. So they were very configurable, they were very powerful in a sense, but of course needed somebody who understood what was behind it. But 99% of the market is not like that. There is a huge market of people that are interested in getting statistics and understanding what's going on, even if they are not a contact center. So they wouldn't consider themselves a contact center. They just happen to pay a few people every month so that they answer the phone. And they would never go look for a contact center solution, but they would like to understand if their money is well spent or not. And so if you can provide it, and this is very easy for a centralized and cloud-based system, if you can provide them a solution that basically just works, you click on a button and enter a credit card, and you start getting some big numbers on the screen, and that's everything they need to do. It is a very interesting opportunity. So in the last few years, what we did, we started partnering with telcos in order to offer Qmetrics as a white label solution to their customers, and built all the infrastructure to make it work at scale. At the moment, we have a few thousand instances active on our own cloud internally, plus a number of other systems that are directly managed by the telcos.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, so I was thinking that, in fact, the cloud could have been a good opportunity for you, because you're providing, as you said, a way for companies to find out if the solution they're using is working for them, if they're doing things right, and how to correct it if things are not going right, because that's part of our work. Which leads me into the fact that you probably know the call center market better than many people who are actually operate call center and call center software. And the other big change happened after that bad sandwich, which should have been, I don't know, some kind of chicken soup, but it wasn't. So here we are. So what happened in the call center industry since people have started to have not be able to go to the actual call center to work, for instance? What have you seen happen?
What we have an interesting point of view on this, because by running the cloud infrastructure, we see a lot of data flowing through. So last year in March, by the end of March, we realized that the traffic in Europe was down about 25%. And it was an interesting situation, because COVID was just starting to roll out in Europe, let's say. And it was an interesting situation, because we were seeing that companies were operational, so they still had agents logged on to queues and that would be able to answer the phone, but people were not calling in. So it was a strange situation. So everybody was scared, started working from home, and left the telephone aside. By June, things were kind of normal. So in terms of levels, they were about what they were, maybe something more than what they were in the same period last year, the previous year. But in some places, for example, in South Africa, the situation was really, really bad, meaning that we have seen companies losing like 40-50% of the traffic. So it's quite a lot of, we have been talking to a number of telcos, and everybody was saying that we're seeing more or less what we were seeing. So it was a really bad situation. They had a very strong lockdown in South Africa. So at the moment, what happened is that in March, a lot of people realized that, especially the ones that didn't run let's say, pure player operations. So you have 200 people in a number of buildings, and you have everything in place to do the monitoring. You have a hot desking. You have everything they need. But on smaller operations, where people used to say, okay, whatever, I don't really need anything special, because I have 10 people, I can see what is going on. I can feel what is going on by looking at what people are doing, by sitting at their desks. And now, after March, this was not possible anymore. So we have seen, from us, it has been interesting because we have seen a lot of interest, and so it was a pretty good year compared to everybody else, because a lot of people started having the issue of doing monitoring without being able to do it by themselves or just by walking around. And the other thing that everybody was thinking about was how to provide voice to people that are remote or working from home. And luckily, this was wherever you have WebRTC, for example, it's pretty easy to set this up and to move it around. But a lot of people were not prepared, so they had to learn the hard way how to make it work. And this happened between March and June of last year. In general, I'd say that the interest has been pretty strong, especially for cloud solutions, because everybody started using clouds. I mean, for us, it's kind of strange because, but 90% of the world likely didn't use Teams or Zoom or whatever before the pandemic, so they had no idea. They didn't even know what they were. So this year, everybody started moving to this kind of platform and to have video platform and sharing platform, and everybody was trying to understand how these things were working and how to make them work. So there was a lot of support and hand holding in terms of helping people get something that would be effective and effectual for them.
You know, you raise a very interesting point. Call centers had to get organized like larger companies. That has happened in other spaces too. People that used to be 20 people in a building used to be, well, I just walk over to Lorenzo's desk and ask him a question. And now you cannot do that anymore. So smaller outfits had to get organized like they were larger companies, which usually already had monitoring and communication in place. That's something we've observed in other industries, but I think it's pretty critical to call centers because your operators or agents are not generally super qualified people. So monitoring is probably even more important.
Exactly, and not only because their job is not typically not technical. So somebody who does a good call center rep is a professional. So they're very good, but they're very good at talking to people, understanding people, and maybe closing a sale. But their point is not how do I plug in the phone or which kind of mic do I need. And
Yeah.
so these people and even the staff that it was serving them had to learn by doing. So they tried to understand which were the best options. A lot of people started realizing that they needed a parallel infrastructure. So you have something that goes along with voice. So for example, Keymetrics always had chats and ways to keep people off the voice path so that the operator could talk to the caller and still get internal information, access internal files, or talk to an expert without without putting the caller on hold. But these things I think they were used way more this year than the 10 years that they existed before, because before it was okay, whatever. Only the biggest players that had a very strong point on quality, so they needed to justify typically contact centers in the Western world that were relatively expensive, but they had to justify why they were more expensive than the competition, had this kind of tooling in place so that they could demonstrate and show why they were what they were doing and why they were better. And now everybody started to realize that this was actually important. So even if you never thought about it before, and this is we see a lot of adoption for very small systems, because and this is a different problem, because it's kind of hard to find the right language to talk to these people, because these people are not even contact centers. They very often don't have an IT, but they have the need. So you have to find a way to basically streamline everything, find a very a way that is very visually simple, so that they can get they need very little in terms of statistics, and then they will ask for help if they need to drill down. But they need a way to be guided in getting in understanding what is going on. If they do, they're very happy, and they are in terms of software as a service, they are very sticky. So they're happy. They keep on they keep on using the solution, and we see that they on existing customers they learn more, and so they use more features over time, and it is quite interesting.
So from a so since you have a broad knowledge of the call center market, because you see data go through and you're constantly analyzing stuff, and you can see data coming in from a broad spectrum of companies. If I was a call center company running, let's say, a provider, so I do campaigns for other people, so the most common type of company, and I got right now I want to modernize my infrastructure. It might be late now, but some people might still be on the fence and still might want to get into the more modern aspect. What would you do if you're starting from a room with 20 people in it that just plays calls out through an asterisk and trunks?
Well, I think that the first thing I would do myself is to find a good telephony provider. So having a cloud infrastructure or and somebody who is going to take care of it is very critical, because it used to be critical, but it used to be important, but not critical. Nowadays, it makes no sense to run a number of things in-house, where you can simply have somebody else do it better than you do. The second thing you need is monitoring. So you don't need much, maybe. You just need something. You don't need a lot of numbers. You just need to have a baseline, so kind of the very basic information on who is doing what, keeping track of agent poses, so understanding how many calls are being made by each agent, and how quickly they are working, and understanding all the back office work. But this is very basic, so you don't need to drown in data, but you need to have a North Star, so you know which way you're going. And today, this is not complex to get up and running. So I think it's not having something like this is really money wasted. In general, I think that one of the best thing that is of my job is when you find somebody that they started adopting your solution, and when they start looking at the data, they tell you, "Hey, this is wrong." So it's your software is not so good, because you see, we are not losing 30% or 40% or 70% of the calls. I mean, you're off. I mean, there's something
It has
broken
to be
with
wrong,
it.
yeah.
Yeah, it has to be wrong. And when they realize that it should be wrong, but it's not, because they had been losing a lot of calls and opportunities, or they had huge, very, very bad wait times in specific moments, and they never realized. At that point, frankly, you see these people that say, "Hey, I have something new. I didn't know I needed glasses." You know, when you don't need glasses, and then you say, first you start looking at the fine print to say, "No, I cannot read it," but you pretend you can read it. At some point, you put your glasses on and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
it's a different life. Now I can see." So it's
knowing is very important. So if you were approaching, again, the call center owner that has 20 people, etc., never done any metrics, etc., what are the first 2 or 3 metrics someone who's running a call center needs to be aware of? Like, if you were to look at the various statistics your software produces, which are the most important numbers call center needs to be aware of?
Well, the biggest thing for a call center depends on whether they are inbound or outbound. Let's say inbound.
Yeah.
Because with outbound, you have less control, because place calls, but you don't know who's going to answer and why. For inbound, the biggest, your number one thing is how quickly you're answering, because people will not be happy to wait in line. And the second thing is how much time your agents are idle. So it is important, for example, for us, if you look at idle from the point of view of the telephony switch, maybe your agent is idle 6 hours a day. But of course, your agent is not idle 6 hours a day. Typically, they will be doing something else. So it's very important to keep track of what they're doing. So maybe they may be paused or not answering the phone at the moment, but maybe they're doing back office, or they're doing email, or they're doing something else. So it's very important to have a unified view, so to actually understand how busy your agents are and when they are busy. So to get to understand across time the kind of dimensioning you need. Because typically when you hire people for a month, a week, whatever. So the shifts are typically the hiring is long term, but the traffic flow in a contact center is very it changes a lot depending. For example, you may have a peak at Monday at 11,
Yeah.
but then you on Thursday at 5 p.m. Nobody's going to call you. So it is very important that you understand how busy you are, so that you can prepare for the peak and find something else to do for your agents when there is no incoming traffic. Typically, you can do something else, or have a way to schedule other activities. So these are the most important things, because with this you can have economically, you can have understanding of what is going on, and then you can have something that makes sense from in terms of the bottom line. So you can understand whether your resources are used correctly or intelligently or not. So these are the first thing I would be looking at, and then it depends on your specific
What you're
industry,
doing
your specific
exactly.
targets.
Cool.
Exactly.
So. There's one thing that it's not about call centers, but it's about what you do in particular that's been always been interesting in your presentations. You are probably one of the foremost users of Clojure in the telephony space. So,
Yes.
Clojure and Kafka. What have you gotten out of Clojure? Why do you like it so much? And do you recommend it for other people to get started with?
Well, Clojure was is very strange, because Clojure is a Lisp, and I started the programming when I was a kid with assembly. So, and then I moved to C and the Algol family of languages. So I mostly used Java and whatever. And Clojure and Lisp was a totally different experience. So it took me so much time to learn Clojure, because when you start a new language, for example Go, you start in a few hours you can start writing code that works. Because you need to understand something that is different, but basically it's kind of more or less, it's JavaScript or Java or C or whatever. So it's more or less the same thing. With Clojure, with Lisp, is a totally different. It's a different planet. So it's like speaking a different language, and you don't know the words, you don't know how to build phrases. But when you realize the way it works, you say it's so clear. The big thing of Clojure is that everything is immutable. So when you say everything is immutable, people will say, what? So the idea is that you cannot change values, you cannot change anything. But this also means that, for example, you cannot modify an object and change anything within the object. So when you get a picture, when you have a pointer to something, the thing is never going to change. And this also means that if you need, for example, a snapshot or anything, you just keep a pointer to it. Nobody's ever going to change it. It's impossible. You need to send it to a different thread, no problem, because it's never going to change. And of course, it has a number of tricks up its sleeve, so that when you do changes, because you need to do changes, of course, sooner or later, it is feasible without spending so much as it would look like that you copy everything every time you do a small mutation. The other thing of Clojure is that you're used to thinking in terms of objects and pointers. And Clojure thinks in terms of values. And when you realize that something is a value, it's totally liberating. So you don't care about equality anymore. So there are so many things you don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
It is Clojure thinks in terms of data. So it has a very, very powerful library to work with data, to manipulate data. The core library is huge. There is everything in there.
Is it statically typed?
No, Clojure is this is the biggest weakness I find in Clojure is that it's totally dynamic.
Oh.
It has so totally dynamic means it's very nice to write, it's very nice to work with, but it's also very nice to. It's very easy to shoot yourself in the foot. So it is you have to be careful. Clojure has a way that is not typing, but is more oriented on values, so that you can basically define specs, and a spec will validate things, will make sure that things are what they are supposed to be. So let's not call it a type, because Rich doesn't like the word typing, but it is a kind of. So it is very powerful.
Yeah, even the terminology is different. If you have something that's checking if it's a number, it's a type checking. It is.
No, it's because with spec, because as everything is dynamic, it is very easy to do. I mean, you could have multiple something that are not represented physically at the JVM or JavaScript in the same way, but they are the same. You could say I have a number or something, or a string that contains a number. And you can define it in a very, very explicit way, so you have no surprises. My Clojure works very well, for example, with Kafka with the events, and this is something that we liked, because you have a stream of when you have a stream of events and you just reprocess them, rewrite them, and you change them somehow and send them somewhere else. With Clojure, this is very easy to do, because it's very data oriented and it's very tight. The code that you write, it is really there is a really little code you do. So there is no functions are very small. Everything is very compact. My feeling is that it is worthwhile having a look at Clojure, especially if you're a professional programmer, even if you're never going to use it in practice, because when you realize it has a number of ideas that are interesting, and it is very, very challenging to get started, to start thinking in that way. When you realize the way it works, you will see that you will be implementing things along these lines also in other languages. For example, most of what we do is written in Java, or now we're starting to use Kotlin, that is still very, very similar to Java. And but you start using ideas that are different in terms of what you expect, what you should do if you have a null, or what you should do. There are a number of things. Everything starts to be a list, and you look more on the data and less on the function that runs, and then less on objects.
That is really interesting. Yeah, I've done some Clojure when I was reading a book about concurrency models, and I've always found it interesting. But it is true that even if you haven't done it, some of the ideas are, even if you don't use it, some of the ideas that are in there are going to be valuable to anybody doing development, because it's, functional stuff. Lisp is one of the base dialects of programming, so it's certainly important. Great. So today we had a very interesting chat about call center metrics. We tried to figure out what people should be doing if they're not ready. It might be late, but if you want to do something about that, reach out to Lorenzo and he'll be happy to help. And thank you. We had Lorenzo Emilitri from Loway, makers of Q Metrics. And I'll see you next week. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.